a special day today. There's some people who touch your heart, and Jamie, who we wanted to celebrate today, was certainly one of the people who touched many people's hearts. And I was thinking about it. Why do certain people touch your heart and others don't as much? Yeah, it is because they are giving more than they are taking, because they are enthusiastic, they are inspiring, they are energetic. And Jamie was for me exactly this, yeah, because she was so much devoted to what we are doing. She was so much devoted to the cause of animals, of animal welfare, and I think for this she also added to us something which was the non-scientific part of being an activist, of being somebody who wants to be active, who does not accept the status quo, somebody who wants to move things forward to make a change. And I think this was impressive. Yeah, this is something you don't necessarily expect from a staff member. These scientists, we always think, oh yeah, we have the data, we show it, we do it differently. But somebody who is saying, yes, we want to do more, and I'm happy to be part of the team to get you moving, who is spending her private time in a shelter, who even was tempted to work in the shelter instead of working with us because she felt she can do more good there at a certain time. She was so devoted to this cause, yeah. That was inspiring, I think, for others who are juggling their data, running their experiments and whatever. She was really the complement we needed to move things, yeah. So I miss her dearly. It's a spirit, it's an engagement, enthusiasm you cannot get enough of. The willingness to take care of animals, not as more important than the humans, the consumers, the patients, we're all concerned about, but as living beings, we really want to take as important and treat as well as possible. I think that's a spirit which we want to maintain. So I'm most grateful that you are joining us, and we have 3 incredible speakers, and we will hear from Katrin Hermann about these speakers. She helped to set this all up. Marty Stevens helped us to set this up. So we had a great team behind this. So I hope you enjoy the contributions, and I hope it keeps the memory of Jamie alive. There's a nice saying, you're only gone if nobody remembers you. And this evening is for remembering her and for continuing her legacy in this sense. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Thomas. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Hughes. I am the communications manager for the center. I was also very good friends with Jamie, aside from just being a colleague. For me, I think it's really important to focus on the positivity and what she brought to the world. And part of what she brought to the world was her wit. She had a very sharp tongue and did not tolerate BS very well at all. I always appreciated that with her. You knew with Jamie, she was just going to tell you exactly like it was. More importantly, though, Jamie cared about animals, and her name, the second A in CAAT, stands for animals, and she really made that her life's purpose was taking care of animals. I would see her sometimes in the middle of work. She would get a call from a shelter. She would get a call from someone who had found an abandoned dog or an abandoned cat, and instantly, lunchtime, she would get up and go. I mean, she was rescuing animals all the time, on her way to work, on her way home, always ready to act and take care of an animal that needed help. And that was just amazing to me, her commitment. Her house was full of animals. She was fostering. She just had such a love for unfortunate animals, animals that needed help. And her love for her kids was just so obvious. I mean, she'd bring her kids into the office sometimes, and just seeing the way she reacted with them was just really heartwarming. So for me, the focus is always on Jamie's life and the brightness that she brought to all of those around her and to the animal protection community. In particular, she started her own animal charity at one point. Everyone at every local shelter knew her by name and knew they could call on her and knew they could trust her. So Jamie was just a friend and such a bright light, and that's how I will always remember her and honor her for the work that she did. I mean, she just cared, and you could feel it and you could see it every day in what she did. So we're running a bit late. I'm thinking that perhaps maybe we'll do the testimonials at the end, or actually, right, Michelle,
No,
why don't you?
please
Okay.
have the family do their
Oh,
testimonials now.
sure, that's great. Michelle, you, and then maybe Connie, if you would like to say something too.
Mom, that's on you right now. You're muted.
I want to thank you sincerely. Raising Jamie from the time she was 5, I knew that she had a calling for animals. So she wouldn't even fish because her dad would keep them and cook them, and she couldn't tolerate that. So it began way back then. What I didn't know about Jamie and what you guys have showed me is how deep it went, and how well known she is. And as much as I love and respect my daughter, I have to tell you that the symposium last year brought to light how many lives she touched. And if you think that you're just doing a small thing, I want you all to know that you changed my life, like literally changed my heart set. Her, just to be brief, because we are running late, her daughter, Haley, who everybody knows is her pride and joy, graduated 6 months early from high school this year. She was accepted into 5 or 6 different colleges with a full paid ride. She did select the University of Birmingham in Alabama, but she's not able to start next week, August 25th, when she's supposed to, because the child is in the military. She signed up and she's in boot camp right now, and she won't even get out of boot camp until the 23rd of August. So she's going to have to push that back a month or so. We are extremely proud of her, beyond extremely proud of her. She is an amazing young woman, and she has done some great things in her life. She misses her mother dearly, but she is still moving on. Her Jamie's youngest son has found his way either through COVID to be on the honor roll, and the other 2 children are doing well also. Thank you so much for what you do for them. They have their own accounts set up, and I'm eagerly keeping it for crossing fingers that they will also go to college and make themselves as great as their mom was. So thank every one of you from the bottom of my heart. Michelle, we're running late, so get on board.
You're muted.
I can't talk. You just keep going.
Here's her dad. And he wants to just say thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Great. Hold on.
Leave it to Jackie, knock down my computer. What you have given us has absolutely nothing to do about the fundraiser. You restored my heart in a time when it was the darkest it's ever been. And I just want you guys to know you're all going to heaven, because I already put in a word for you. Okay. So thank you again. And if there's ever anything that I can do for your department or for your group or your family, you only have to say the word and it's yours. Thank you.
Can't hear.
Okay, I would go on and introduce our first speaker, if that's okay with everybody. And the first speaker we have today is actually our Marty Stevens from our Center for Alternatives to Animal Testing. And he will talk about how the US animal protection community contributed to the 3 R's of replacement, reduction, and refinement. And Dr. Stevens is a senior research associate at the Center for Alternatives to Animal Testing, and he promotes the 3 R's for many years, already decades. And at CAAT, he was the founding director of the evidence-based toxicology collaboration, where he coordinated the development of new approaches to assessing the performance of test methods. And prior to joining Johns Hopkins University in 2011, Dr. Stevens was with the Humane Society, where he advocated for the protection of animals in use in research, testing, and education for almost 30 years already. And he got several awards, one of them from the Society of Toxicology's Enhancement of Animal Welfare Award. And he was also a member of the National Academies of Sciences Committee, where they produced the landmark report on toxicity testing in the 21st century. So I hand it over to you, Marty, for your talk.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm just starting to share my screen now. Let me know if this works. I realize I need to go into presentation mode.
It's good.
All right. That's not the first slide by a long shot. Okay, here we go. So can you see that in presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay. Still a little choked up from Connie's testimonial. I earlier showed her the animal shelter shirt I had on, my t-shirt with the paw print that says adopt. And as you heard, I spent many years in the animal protection community. So one of the perks of being on the planning committee is you can put yourself on the program. So I went ahead and did that, thinking that you might find this talk interesting. The U.S. animal protection community's contribution to the 3 R's.
Sure, he has on the thing, and yeah, he was touching.
Hearing a little noise in the background. So regardless of whether I was on the planning committee or not, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to help keep Jamie's memory alive. We were co-workers for many years, and we were quite close. So I'm happy to be a part of this. I realize that not all of you are steeped in the history and the rhetoric of alternatives. So just for 30 seconds, let me let's see here. Yeah, there you go. Let me say a few words about alternatives, which is in our title, the Center for Alternatives to Animal Testing. So alternatives are any one of the 3 R's. You'll see the 3 R's in my title. Those are replace, reduce, and refine the use of animals in experimentation. So replace and reduce are intended to limit the use of animals in testing, and refine refers to innovations that can limit the suffering of animals that are used. So here's a simplified depiction of the universe that many of us work in, whether it's at the center or elsewhere. So you have the animal testing community. These are typically the companies that produce products that are tested on animals. Then you have the rule makers that govern that process. So these are typically the lawmakers at the federal level or the state level. But you also have entities like the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that I'll talk more about later as an important rule maker that's sort of quasi-governmental. You have the 3 R's community that CAAT is a part of, those that are looking to promote alternative methods. And then you have the animal protection community, where Jamie and I came from, typically humane societies. I was at the Humane Society of the United States. You might hear me refer to HSUS, where we worked on animal testing issues. And you'll see that some of the examples that I've drawn from relate to the work that HSUS did and I did while I was there. And of course, Jamie straddled animal protection and the 3 Rs in different times in her careers. And so we had that kinship. Getting down to my topic, I was approached a few years ago by Michael Balls, who said he was going to be editing a book on the history of alternative test methods in toxicology. He was going to do that with Robert Combs, now unfortunately deceased, the late Bob Combs, and Andrew Worth. And I said I would be happy to contribute. And Michael asked me to be part of a chapter where my part would be describing the contribution of the animal protection community to advancing alternative methods. And here you see the headpiece from that article, and my contribution was the part dealing with the contributions from the animal protection community. And just to be clear, this was focused on the United States only, but I'm sure that many of the things that I wrote about also apply to other countries. So my approach to this was I didn't want to catalog the accomplishments of individual organizations and just go organization by organization through my chapter. I thought that would be a recipe for a disaster, actually, that the animal groups would say I've mischaracterized their contribution and they did this, not that, and they did more than I'm depicting them as having done. So I stayed away from that with a 10-foot pole and instead took a much less controversial approach, simply cataloging the various types of contributions that the community as a whole made, and then provided specific examples of that. And I adopted a largely historical framework, in part because my tenure goes back quite a number of years, but also some of the contribution types are tied to the early history of the 3 Rs. So I did have to go back a bit far at times. And then I want to emphasize that my approach, as you'd expect, reflects my own biases and experience, and that if other people had to do this, I'm sure they would slice the pie differently and come up with different categories or emphasize different examples, etc., but perhaps come to the same conclusions. So let's get right into it and go contribution type by contribution type. So I think it's pretty clear that when a lot of people think of the animal protection community dealing with the animal experimentation, animal testing issue, they think of us criticizing animal testing. And here's a rather famous advertisement that appeared in the New York Times in 1980. That was a real rallying cry on the animal testing issue. It was published by a coalition of folks spearheaded by Henry Spira. And it rather quickly led Revlon to do something. They had to do something. So they gave some money to Rockefeller University, and they worked out an arrangement whereby they would do some research and development on alternative methods. But more to the history of CAAT, where many of us work, the larger trade association of the cosmetics industry, not just Revlon, gave a grant to Hopkins to establish a center, and that center became the Center for Alternatives to Animal Testing. That was 1981, and since then things have come full circle in a number of ways. CAAT in 92, almost 10 years plus later, gave the Founders Award to Henry Spira. And later on in that decade, they began an awards program named after Henry Spira, one of the most prominent animal rights activists of the 20th century. I want to leave this example, but also just mention in passing that there were other criticisms of animal testing from the animal protection community that were more technical in nature, pointing out the limitations and flaws of some of the tests. And by the way, this photo came off of the website of the National Museum of American History to show you its importance. Another way, another action by the animal protection community closely connected to criticizing animal testing was encouraging consumer action on the issue. This is the whole, not tested on animals issue. A lot of this focused on cosmetic testing and cosmetic companies. They were seen as more vulnerable, comparing the suffering of animals in the test, particularly the rabbit eye irritancy test, with the notion of beauty from cosmetics. So boycotts were launched against companies like Avon. Promotional campaigns were waged to promote companies that didn't test on animals. There was some clarity brought to the issue of what it exactly means to not test on animals. And that was the Coalition for Consumer Information on Cosmetics, a coalition of animal groups trying to hold the company's feet to the fire when they claimed not to be testing on animals. And of course, all this led indirectly to pressure to develop alternative methods. Another approach, perhaps more subtle, was making the case to scientists and other decision makers that alternative methods were the real deal. There was a lot of pressure on companies to do something on the animal testing issue, and their scientists were wondering if replacement methods were up to snuff, or whether this was all just a ploy to get them to stop testing on animals. So the scientists, among us in particular, had a number of presentations, writings, and essentially we're just trying to convince the companies that we thought this was indeed the way to go. And in the chapter that I mentioned that I wrote, I say here, simple interactions that help to erode the antagonism that each side had for each other. It's easy to forget that 30, 40 years ago, we were at each other's throats, and there wasn't a lot of trust the way there is now on this issue. So another activity of the animal community was funding 3R's activity themselves, not waiting for the companies to do it all. There was targeted funding for specific projects. PETA and others have championed that approach. There also was the establishment of organizations affiliated with animal groups that the animal groups spun off, as with the American Anti-Vivisection Society and its alternatives affiliate, the Alternatives Research and Development Foundation, which funds granting opportunities, has awards. So that was another way for the animal groups to support alternative methods. And then going way back, the Animal Welfare Institute helped finance the distribution of the founding document in this field, the Principles of Humane Experimental Technique, which was published in the UK in 1959. So a long time, 60 years ago, I guess it was. And we needed it distributed here in the United States, and AWI helped to do that. They had the foresight to do that. You can just, looking back from where we are now, you can say, well, that, of course, that was a natural thing to do. But in 59, it didn't seem necessarily like a natural thing to do. No one had heard of Russell and Birch or their book. So it took quite some foresight on the part of Christine Stevens and the AWI to do that. Another activity was honoring individual scientists, and this was a subtle way to point out that the animal community was, wholeheartedly in on this issue, supporting these individual scientists and giving them the accolades, and in some cases award funding that they were due. This is Bob Kavlock of the EPA receiving the HSUS's Russell and Birch Award at the 10th World Congress on Alternatives in 2017. And with him is our chairman of the board of the CAAT advisory board, Andrew Rowan, my former coworker, who was with the Humane Society of the United States for many, many years, and now is with Wellbeing International. Yet another way, I think this is a fairly obvious way that probably many people think of when they think of animal groups and doing work on alternative methods. Animal groups are particularly well set up to do lobbying, not only direct lobbying by their lobbyists, but lobbying by their members. These are membership-based organizations. And in the era of the internet and email, they can easily mobilize their constituency on this or that issue. So here in recognition of the lobbying activity of certain animal groups, the Lush Prize folks gave their 2017 prize for lobbying to a number of animal organizations for advancing the Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA, which has any number of animal provisions that advance the cause of animals. So many of you know these folks, but left to right, Christy Sullivan, Sarah Amundsen, and Kate Willett are with respectively the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, the Humane Society of the United States, and Humane Society Legislative Fund. Actually, that's slightly out of order. The HSUS and the HSLF should be reversed there. Another approach that kind of makes sense from a modern perspective is influencing the influencers. And I had mentioned OECD early on in the presentation, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They were a post-war organization intended to be an economic alliance of industrialized nations. And so they were all about streamlining trade barriers and the like. And they had to have a test guidelines program that's very influential. The types of tests that are in that program and are approved, how one does them, all quite influential. And we were able to get a seat at the table. ICAPO, the International, Council for Animal Protection at the OECD. And it consists of 10 animal groups that you see here. And the mission is to seek to ensure the widest possible integration of alternative methods in the OECD's guidelines and test programs. So probably the best example of influencing the influences that I'm aware of getting into the OECD, and you can see Ursula Sauer here and Troy Seidel, and believe it or not, that's me, a younger version of me there, still not without much hair. And I thought getting this photo into the presentation, even though I had to break the mold of the format, was worth it because it's such an interesting photograph historically. I pulled it off the web, and it's illustrating the idea of participating in multi-stakeholder efforts, which the animal groups have done over the years. Depicted here is an early meeting of ICVAM, and there I am, and there are other animal representatives here. And I just thought this was so interesting. You can probably, even though it is a bit pixelated, you can probably identify some of these folks readily. Alan Goldberg, the first director of CAAT, and I mentioned Andrew Rowan, John Fraser, who was with CAAT, and others. We should have a quiz on who could name the highest number of folks in this photograph. It's probably not the best example of animal groups being involved in multi-stakeholder activity. Probably a better example would have been the Fourth World Congress on Alternative Methods, because HSUS was the primary organizer of that, the lead organizer, held in New Orleans in 2002, almost 20 years ago, and spearheaded by Andrew Rowan. And I've had a little bit of fun with some of this, but bringing Russell and Birch into the 3Rs community. Many of you are aware that when Russell and Birch published their book, which I showed earlier, Principles of Humane Experimental Technique, that they basically disappeared. You know, they went into the equivalent of the witness protection program and were never heard from again, even though the alternatives field was born and emerged and carried on kind of in their name. But in 1993, we were able to get the two of them together for a reunion of the two of them, and reminiscing about the book and what it meant to them. And then that got them hooked back into the alternatives community. And here's a famous shot of Bill Russell bursting into song at the Third World Congress in Bologna, in this huge hall, the Aula Magna at the University of Bologna. And it's safe to say that Bill was an inspiring figure to many of us, and I think we're better off for the fact that he did come back into the fold, and I think that indirectly advanced the field. So that's it with the examples. I think that the examples illustrate that the contribution of the animal protection community, those contributions to the 3Rs are certainly diverse. They extend from the earliest days of the 3Rs to the present. One might say that the animal protection community was an early adopter in the sense of promoter of the 3Rs framework. And they created the climate for industry to adopt this framework. Granted, those early days in creating that climate were antagonistic criticizing the animal tests, criticizing the companies, but nonetheless, that laid the groundwork for them to adopt the 3 Rs framework, particularly replacement alternatives. And then the animal protection community pivoted and sought to advance the 3 Rs via lobbying and funding, et cetera. And a quote from the chapter, I think it's fair to say that the animal protection community was a major driving force in the uptake and applications of the 3 Rs approach to animal testing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marty. That was very, very interesting and also hopeful what you achieved in that time. We actually have questions, or at least one question I saw. Do you think that the US and Canada or Europe is further along in defining and implementing alternatives and reducing animal testing is the question we have for you, Marty.
Yeah, so I guess they're asking which of those 3 areas might be further along. And I think the consensus is that Europe is farther along on these issues in many respects, not all. But one of the things that Europe does is it provides a pretty good snapshot every few years of the status of the field of animal testing and where animals are used and where they're no longer used. So we can take some heart in where they're no longer used or where the use is way down. I would say, though, that in the States, in the past decade or so, we have really taken a lead, I think it's fair to say, in what these days we call 21st century testing, 21st century methods, such as in the federal ToxCast program and the EPA ToxCast program and similar programs, large scale, high throughput, in vitro, meaning non-animal in the test tube, kind of robotic assisted testing, which is very high tech. And also in more recent years, the organ on a chip, which is certainly international, but a number of the companies are based in the States. So I think it's more of a tie these days, and certainly Canada is on a roll with its new center in Windsor.
Thank you very much. I think we move on to the next speaker. So our next speaker is Amy Fultz, and Amy co-founded Chimp Haven in 1995 with other people, and she has been at the sanctuary since 2004 and has worked with chimpanzees for 24 years now. And she's responsible for the socialization of the chimpanzees. And sorry, missed this. And also she is very good at introducing them when they come to the sanctuary. It's very difficult to introduce them to the group, and that's what she's been doing extensively. And she has professional experience also from working in zoos and sanctuaries and research facilities, doing a lot of behavioral work. And yeah, so that's what she's going to talk about Chimp Haven's story. And she has published and presented a number of scientific papers based on her research as well. And she has an honorary PhD from Centenary College. So Amy, please start your presentation. We are looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me today. I think I'm probably one of the people here who didn't have the opportunity to know Jamie, but just hearing all of you speak about her, I think she and I would have been kindred spirits for sure. We had a lot of the same interests, so I wish I had had a chance to know her. So I'm going to talk about Chimp Haven and I don't know how many of you have heard about Chimp Haven from Marty, Dr. Stevens, but he's been involved since the early days with Chimp Haven as well, and was on our board of directors and is now a trustee. So we are outside Shreveport, Louisiana, which many people have not heard about, but we are in the upper northwest corner of Louisiana, just about 15 minutes from the Texas border. And we're on 200 acres of beautiful land that was donated to us by what we call parishes here. Most places in the US would call it a county, but the parish actually donated this land. What you see here is an older aerial photo, and I'll show you another slide coming up, kind of more like what we look like now. But we have right now over 300 chimpanzees that were formerly used for biomedical research living at Chimp Haven. In the late 1980s and the early 90s, chimpanzees were being used in biomedical research, mainly research on HIV, hepatitis, and AIDS. There was consensus from a number of different groups, including the researchers, the animal protection community, geneticists. A number of people got together on this National Research Council, and the consensus was that chimpanzees were actually not a good model for HIV and AIDS because they didn't get the same sort of illnesses that people did. And there's only been a few cases where chimpanzees have actually progressed to what looks like AIDS in a human being. And in the late 80s and early 90s, they started breeding initiatives because chimps were being utilized for HIV and AIDS. And so the thought was that we would need more chimpanzees to be utilized in this research. And so we started breeding additional chimps, but then they turned out not to be such great models. So there were literally thousands of chimpanzees in research in the 90s. The National Research Council was put together, like I said, with this group of different people to kind of discuss the use of the fact that the chimps weren't good models. Research was sort of falling off. We were getting more into the 3 Rs and starting to learn that maybe we were going to need to do something with the chimpanzees. There was a discussion about whether or not the chimpanzees should actually be euthanized, as we do with many other species, once we're finished with research on them. And there was only one dissenting opinion between all these different groups. Everyone said, no, we should not euthanize the chimpanzees. We should provide for them for the rest of their lives and provide some sort of retirement for the chimpanzees. So at the time, I was actually working in a biomedical research facility, doing behavioral research. And we had, at the time that I was there, we had over 250 chimpanzees. And I was a young 20-year-old with my boss, Dr. Linda Brent at the time. And lots of people were sort of talking about this idea of, okay, we need to retire these chimps. Chimpanzees live 50, 60 years sometimes in captivity. They're very strong, they're dangerous wild animals. How can we provide for the chimpanzees for their long-term care? And Linda and I were actually at a primatology conference with lots of other people that were sort of discussing it. And Linda and I went back to our hotel room and she looked at me and said, you know what, lots of people are talking about this, but let's do something. And that was the start of Chimp Haven. We went to our boss at the time, a gentleman named Dr. Tom Butler, and he thought we were sort of crazy 20-year-olds, but to his credit, he didn't say that to us at the time. He was very supportive of this idea of building a sanctuary. So one of the unique things I think about Chimp Haven over the years is that we have had many different diverse groups working together for the good of the chimpanzees. Unlikely partners in terms of research community, animal welfare, animal protection people, the sanctuary community, even the zoo community, and lots of individuals working towards creating a federal sanctuary system. Throughout the years, we have had lobbyists and people helping us with legislation like HSUS and Animal Protection New Mexico and other places. And we're continuing to collaborate with all these different groups for the good of the chimpanzees. So in 2002, one of the last things that President Clinton did, former President Clinton did, was he signed into being what's called the Chimp Act. And the Chimp Act provided for a national chimpanzee sanctuary system. They put out a request for proposals, and our group was actually chosen in 2002. We are a nonprofit organization, and as I mentioned, we have donated land, but we do receive some funding from the National Institutes of Health. So the National Institutes of Health provides for 75% of the chimpanzees' ongoing care. They do not pay for new construction, educational things, and we're currently expanding. As I mentioned, chimps are very strong. They live a long time. It costs us approximately $18,000 a year per chimp to care for them. So we have to raise the matching funds. And then in 2015, I never thought this would actually happen during my lifetime. NIH announced that it would no longer support biomedical research using chimpanzees. And at the same time, US Fish and Wildlife listed captive chimpanzees as an endangered species. Before this, chimpanzees were actually just listed as being endangered in the wild, but just threatened in captivity, which sort of allowed us to continue to use them in biomedical research, allowed us to use them in entertainment and as pets, et cetera. So these two really important decisions happened in 2015, and NIH began developing the plan to retire the NIH-owned and supported chimpanzees. I'm happy to tell you that we have less than 20 NIH-owned and supported chimpanzees that are still waiting to come to Chimp Haven, but the rest have made it. So around this time, you can kind of see, I started in the field in the 80s, and you can see there were many chimps in laboratories, and that sort of went down over time. And we hit this mark right around 2016, where now there are more chimpanzees in sanctuaries than there are in research facilities. So at Chimp Haven right now, we have, as I mentioned, over 300 chimpanzees. They're about 50-50 male, female. They range in age from 4 to 61. We have quite a few 61-year-olds right now. The 61-year-olds tend to be what we call wild-born. And a wild-born just means that the chimpanzees were born in Africa and brought into the US for biomedical research. That happened typically prior to 1975, before the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species went through. And so those guys tend to be our 50, 60-year-olds now. We have 31 families of 3 to 20 members in each family, and our average family size is 11. One of the things that at Chimp Haven that we have worked on over the years is making sure that we have a number of diverse enclosures. Some of the chimpanzees, when they first come to Chimp Haven, they have not had experience with forest, and some of them even haven't had experience on grass. And they like to keep close to the metal mesh that you see here, or they stay along the sides of the concrete of the enclosures. One of the other things we've done is we've provided wooden ramps for the chimpanzees that don't like to put their feet on the grass, so they can still go out into the middle of the enclosure and, you know, either be in the shade or up on top in the sun and climb and groom with the other chimps and their families. This is just a general overview sort of what Chimp Haven looks like now. You can see over to the right, there's 3 of these multi-acre, what we call habitats for the chimpanzee families. And we just recently have constructed 3 additional habitats for the additional chimpanzees that have been arriving. And then we have a 1/4 acre open open top corrals, and then we have some of those other enclosures that look a little bit more like what we would call a play yard. The first chimpanzees arrived in 2005. Their names were Rita and Teresa. And Rita and Teresa were actually two chimpanzees that I had worked with in the biomedical research facility. And they were two chimpanzees that were both wild born. We weren't sure when we first started Chimp Haven what these chimps would do. Most of the chimpanzees at that time had been living in small groups, pairs, trios, maybe at most 4 or 5 to a group, and none of them had had access to forests. So it was a little scary. Sometimes you hear about zoo animals that won't go out once a beautiful new enclosure is built for them, and we weren't sure what the chimps would do. Thankfully, this is the first day that these guys were out in the habitat. And we got to see what we call species typical behaviors. So just things chimps do in the wild. They started eating about 7 different species of leaves out in the habitats, and they still do. Elm is their favorite. They started climbing trees. The second day they were in the habitat, we saw the first female chimpanzee climb a tree, and they started making nests. Chimpanzees in the wild typically make nests up in the trees. Our trees here in Northwest Louisiana are not large trees. They're rather small and probably won't hold the weight of an adult chimpanzee. So they make the nests typically on the ground. You can kind of see there how the branches are woven into sort of like a bowl. And then what they'll do is they'll put pine needles in the middle and make it soft. And a nest is a little bit of a misnomer because the chimpanzees actually use this as a bed. So a nice place to rest or sleep. And then one of the other things that we saw them doing, this is some of our wild-born chimpanzees started making tools, just like Jane Goodall saw them, like stripping the leaves off of the sticks. And they use the tools here to sometimes fish for fire ants. In Africa, chimpanzees also will fish for biting ants too. So, and now I'd just like to take a few minutes to introduce you to some of the chimps and some of their stories. This is Hamlet's group of boys. There are girls in this group too. It's a large group of 20, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about these guys. Hamlet was actually a chimpanzee again. Well, I guess, yeah, Hamlet and Mikey were both chimps that I worked with back in the 90s, and they came to Chimp Haven in 2006. Hamlet, you see it says impulse control issues. Hamlet had always liked to really display and had never been in a large group before. And as I mentioned, he's now living in a group of 20. He also had never been in a forest. We weren't sure what he would do. And the first day we let him out into the forest, he patrolled the whole perimeter of the area. And he likes to come down and sort of walk with staff around those perimeters. Mikey was actually a nursery reared chimpanzee, which is pretty common back in the 80s and early 90s. Chimpanzees have to learn a lot of behaviors. They don't know them instinctually. And one of the behaviors they don't know instinctually is mothering. And so oftentimes the female chimpanzees that were giving birth to these babies in research wouldn't take care of them, and the chimpanzees would end up in the nursery. So Mikey is one of those chimpanzees that was born in the nursery. One of the things we see with nursery-born chimps is they tend to rock. And part of this is because a baby chimpanzee is typically clinging to its mother, and its mother's moving all around and very active. And so they don't have that stimulation that they would have if they were with their mom. So Mikey rocks. We've been able, with positive reinforcement training, to reduce Mikey's rocking behavior. So what we've done with Mikey is we've trained him to come and touch 2 rings away from a wall that he could rock against. And Ed is a former alpha male. Hugo, who you see there, kind of a little bit smaller, is now the alpha male. I think Ed was happy to kind of hand it over to Hugo. Ed has always been a peacekeeper. chimpanzee males can rule in different ways, but I love Ed because he'd always ruled with kindness. And then you see Jacob, who's right now our oldest male, and he still likes to watch the ladies who he can often see from other groups from his enclosure. And then this is Crystal, and I've got Workout Queen for Crystal. So Crystal also came around 2007, I believe, and was very overweight at the time she came. A lot of times the chimpanzees do come and they are obese or they're overweight, and that's not good for their health, just like it's not good for ours. They can become diabetics. Heart disease is the #1 killer of chimpanzees and other great apes in captivity. And so it's really important that we try to, you know, get them at a healthy weight. And they can be affected also by diabetes and arthritis and other things that are exacerbated if they are overweight. So this, you see the picture of this is Robin, one of our behavior technicians. And what she is doing is, we have a program called Chimpanzee at Chimp Haven, and it is basically to get the chimps moving. And so what Robin is doing is she's actually doing laps, walking with Crystal. Crystal and Robin have a really close relationship. And so they're walking around the perimeter of the enclosure repeatedly. And then when Crystal makes a circuit, she's rewarded with play. Crystal loves to play. In fact, Crystal was introduced into a large group of chimpanzees, and she wanted my attention, and I was trying to tell her to go meet the other chimps, and she just kept, chimps can spit, and she just kept spitting on my boots, trying to get me to play with her. And it's like, Crystal, you need to go meet your new family, which she did eventually. But she has lost 10 kilograms through this chimpanzee program that we have her in. And we have some of the other chimps are in the chimpanzee program if they have mobility issues. We've also had them do squats where they have to touch a target up and down kind of thing too. So it's been really successful. We were lucky enough to work with Disney and National Geographic recently. So if you guys are interested, we are on the Disney Plus streaming service. It's just 1 season. We don't think there'll be a second one, but you can meet some of the crazy characters that I work with. This is Midge, this is Riley, and this is Passion and Carly. And I want to thank everybody for having me. We just put a new virtual tour on our website today. So if you're interested in seeing a little more, you can go to chimphaven.org for that.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. It must be so amazing to work with those chimps. I think we are all into getting to know them now.
Yes.
So there's one question for you. Do you have a maximum capacity of chimpanzees you can take in? Because
well, we're building right now. So we've been in the midst of a capital campaign. We do feel like, you know, we're probably around 400 would be maximum. It really depends on what size groups we can get the chimpanzees into. So it's hard to give a specific number.
But the funding doesn't seem to be a problem, or do you need more?
We're doing really well. We I believe we have not quite 2 million left of our $20 million capital campaign. So most of the expansion is complete. We're just sort of waiting on that last little bit to complete the enclosure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy. So now we come to our last speaker of the day. And I'm happy to introduce Ellie Hansen, who is an award-winning writer and an animal advocate. And she also is the founder of a holistic companion animal supply company based in Montana. And she writes for several popular companion animal magazines. And she also published 2 books so far on dogs, and one is on laboratory dogs. And that's how we actually met each other when she was in the process of researching this book for this book. And I'm looking forward to your talk, Ellie. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, and I'm so honored to be here today speaking with all of you in honor of Jamie. I too feel like she is a kindred spirit, even though I did not know her personally, because of our mutual love of dogs and dog rescue. And I'll start by telling you a little bit about how I got involved in advocating for dogs in research laboratories. I was sitting at my kitchen table one morning with my coffee cup, scrolling through Facebook like I normally do, when an undercover video came up on my screen. And it was a dog in a research laboratory, had obviously been tested on. It was being handled by 2 laboratory workers. They euthanized the dog and threw it onto a wheeled cart. And honestly, in that moment, I had a beagle of my own at that time. And I had no idea dogs were used for research, for products like chemicals and human drugs even. And I was totally shocked. I think I cried for like a half an hour. And then I gathered myself together. I decided I would become super educated on this issue and that I would become a voice for dogs in research laboratories. And that was 7 years ago. Since then, I have adopted 2 former research dogs of my own. They're both beagles. I am officially known as the beagle lady in my town because I'm always walking my beagles around the neighborhood. And I've published a book, just as Dr. Kat Herman said. It's called Laboratory Dogs Rescued. If you can see the photo of the cover of the book on the right of your screen. If you can see the photo of the 2 beagles on the cover, their names are Minnie and Maria, and they were both rescued from a laboratory in China by a rescue organization called Beagle Freedom Project. Their story is in my book, and the amazing thing is that they're both completely blind. For my book, I interviewed over 30 adoptive families of research dogs. So Minnie and Maria are just, it's just our one story in the book. And the book, it is published by McFarland Books, and it will be available this fall. So you may be wondering, sorry, I'm just trying to, the closed captioning is in front of my arrows.
Ellie, you can actually turn off if you just click the CC button on the bottom.
Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I don't.
Or maybe on the top. It will be on our top.
I don't see closed captioning.
Do you see a more button?
Let's see. Chat, stop. No, I don't. For some reason, it won't let me advance because I can't find the closed caption is just right in front of my screen.
I stopped the closed caption now. Did it stop for you?
No.
Mine says
There it
live
goes. There it
transcript.
goes. There it goes. Sorry for her. Everybody needs closed captioning. I apologize. So you may be wondering, how would one go about adopting a dog from a research laboratory? And truthfully, there are only a handful of rescues who kind of specialize in this type of rescue. And one of them is called Kindness Ranch Animal Sanctuary. And it's located in a teeny tiny town of Hartville, Wyoming, which is in the southeastern corner of the state. And both of my laboratory rescues came from Kindness Ranch. This is a 1,000-acre ranch that was dedicated specifically to take in retired research laboratory dogs, cats, and they also have horses and other farm animals on site that came from research, different types of research. So Kindness Ranch is if you can see that there's 3 buildings there, they're actually yurts. The 2 rear buildings house the research dogs, and it's where they go to come to be rehabilitated. Each yurt is set up in like a home environment. So they have 24-hour caretakers. They have a full, kitchen with microwaves and televisions. These are all things that laboratory dogs who come from such a sterile environment have never seen before. And so this is all new and scary. And here they can come decompress, heal, get used to what like a regular household is like before they get ready to be adopted. And they have huge outdoor runs. It's a magical place. I've been there several times. And you can even go visit and rent a house to stay there yourself to meet the research animals. So these are my 2 adopted laboratory dogs, Eddie and Marty. And like I said, they both came from Kindness Ranch. And a few years ago, I was cordially invited to go to prison. It's a high security prison in Montana, to be a guest speaker along with Eddie and Marty. A friend of mine actually worked in the prison, and she thought it would be a great opportunity for me to educate the inmates on animal testing issues. And in this photo, Marty and Eddie, they look pretty chill, pretty relaxed, but that was actually not the case at all when I first adopted them. So let me introduce you to both of them. I adopted Marty as what I will call a high trauma dog. So Marty spent 6 years in a pharmaceutical research laboratory, someplace in Colorado where he was used to test human drugs. I'll describe that before photo on the left. That was taken in 2014 by Kindness Ranch staff. The moment that a laboratory dog gets his or her first moment of freedom is a very emotional moment. So typically this might be this dog's first moment ever outside of a cage. It's definitely their first time ever outside. So in this photo, Marty has never seen the sky, has never put his paws on dirt or grass before, and he's pretty terrified and uncertain. And one of his braver kennel mates has come out and is reassuring him it's okay. It's a pretty touching photo, but you can see how scared he is of what to do next. So I actually applied to adopt a research dog right after I saw that undercover video on Facebook. And not long after, I got a call that a group of lab dogs had been released and that my husband and I could come down and pick one of our own dogs out. So we made the 6-hour drive, which from Billings to Hartsville, Wyoming is 6 hours. And I'll never forget that day when I met Marty. We were seated on the floor in one of those yurts where the dogs were let out of their kennels. And we were seeing how they would interact with us. And I noticed one dog in particular, a beagle, who was pretty thin. He was very skittish. He was totally terrified of me. And my husband wanted nothing to do with us at all. And I remember looking at my husband and I said, that's the dog I want. That's the dog that needs us the most. So we adopted Marty. And when we got Marty home, he did not disappoint us in the trauma department. To him, humans were very scary. He was great with other dogs, but people just meant not good things to him. And so for the first month, we really couldn't really even look at him. Looking at him meant we were going to do something to him. We couldn't even walk towards him, like coming from the front. We had to walk backwards around our house to approach him. It was kind of strange, but we did whatever Marty needed to heal. And after a few months, we kind of like included him in all of our activities, hiking, boating, camping, tons of walking. He healed himself. And today he is I don't know if you can see the photo on the right-hand side of the screen there. He is a goofy, normal 13-year-old dog who loves life totally. He's the goofiest sleeping dog I've ever met. And he's accompanied us on so many road trips, including one last year to the Washington coast, where you can see him enjoying the beach there. So not long after I adopted Marty, I got a call from Kindness Ranch that they had another dog that needed to be placed in a home as soon as possible. He had developed some guarding behavior and he had some pretty serious skin issues from, we're not sure what, but Eddie was rescued by Kindness Ranch when he was 8 years old from a research lab on the East Coast. He was used to test some undisclosed human food products. Not quite sure what that means, but I agreed to take Eddie to join Marty, and we healed up his skin. You can see that photo on the left. He came to us with some horrific skin infections. We're not quite sure what that was from, but we helped heal his skin through good nutrition. And today he's a healthy, happy 15-year-old beagle. And he doesn't like his picture taken. So sorry, I just have those two of him. And so with Marty and Eddie in a good emotional place, in 2019, we were invited to be speakers at the Montana Women's Prison, which is a high security women's prison here in Billings, Montana. And we were invited to speak as part of the prison's Prison Pause program, which is a rehabilitation program for inmates. So the Prison Pause program pairs inmates with dogs from the community who need dog training. So the women inmates learn how to train dogs, they learn how to groom dogs, they learn about dog care in general, which is where we came in, and we came in to educate the ladies on animal testing and the importance of supporting cruelty-free products. And let me tell you, I was totally out of my comfort zone as those steel bars closed behind me. I had never been to prison before, and I just remember having to leave all my belongings at the front desk, my wallet, my coat, my purse, everything. And I remember walking down this hallway with Marty and Eddie, and we walked to the presentation room, and we were greeted by about 30 inmates who were so excited to meet Marty and Eddie, like they were celebrities. And I remember being in front of the room doing my talk, and I let Marty and Eddie off leash, not knowing how they would be with 30 complete strangers. And as I was speaking, they kind of went and mingled with the prisoners. They let each of the prisoners pet them. And sometimes they even would pick a prisoner and sit at their feet. Like for some reason they needed to be there with that person. And I was so blown away by how giving my dogs were after everything they'd been through, that they were so giving to these complete strangers that I still get choked up just thinking about it. And all of those prisoners, they pledged to be cruelty-free in the products that they purchased. And I think we made a really big impact on them. And it was ironic because, you know, not too long before that, Marty and Eddie had been behind bars themselves. And now here they were on the opposite side of the bars. So it was pretty emotional for all of us, I think. And I'm on to the next story. In July 2013, 7 beagles were rescued from a research laboratory near Washington, D.C. The rescue organization was called Beagle Freedom Project, and the type of research the dogs were used for was unknown or undisclosed. So I'm just trying. Sorry, there we go. Okay, so a beagle named George was part of this rescue. And George was adopted by Gail Thompson, who is the current North Carolina State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. And I interviewed Gail about George for my book. And she was telling me how traumatized George was when she first got him. He didn't know how to eat out of a dog bowl, so she had to hand feed him. He was terrified of going through doorways, and so to go to the bathroom outside, so she had to carry him a lot. But after a few months, George adapted to life outside the lab and became Gail's sidekick. And Gail, who was working for Bank of America at the time, she had worked for Bank of America for 15 years, actually quit her job because of George, and she began working for Beagle Freedom Project. So with George's help, Gail helped get the Beagle Bill passed in Maryland and Delaware in 2018. The Beagle Bill is a state-specific bill. It requires research facilities to give cats and dogs up for adoption at the end of experimentation instead of killing them. And it's a humane alternative to euthanasia for research animals. Gail told me how George became a celebrity of sorts in political circles. He became very well known in Annapolis, and he was always allowed in the Capitol buildings to help Gail testify for the bills. And my final slide of George is him sitting on the table as Governor John Carney of Delaware signs the Beagle Bill into law. According to Gail, George has a way of owning a room and always likes to be the center of the conversation. So he typically, it's his thing to jump up on tables and chairs. And obviously here in this photo, nobody minded. In fact, I think they thought it was pretty great. And I just had a final thought, a couple final thoughts. Many former research dogs don't just become pets. They are actually changing people's lives for the better, giving back to us after they have given so much already. Then again, that is what dogs do. But even as our pets, former research dogs are indispensable members of our family, and their value to us is priceless. This photo on the right, it did not make it into my book, but it was one of my favorite photos given to me from the families who I interviewed for my book. This beagle's name is Macy, and she was adopted by the Bowie family. And the Bowie family includes mom, dad, and 3 teenage daughters. And when this family adopted Macy, they became educated on animal testing. All 3 teenage daughters went through all their makeup, cosmetics, creams, shampoos. And if it was tested on animals, they threw it in the trash, and they went out and they told all their friends to do the same. And they went out shopping for cruelty-free cosmetics. So I think it's just an example of how powerful one little dog, with the powerful effect one little dog can have on so many people, given the chance. And once again, to me, that's priceless. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was really touching, the stories. I'm looking forward to reading your book now with all the other stories.
Yes, that was very interesting, Ellie. Thank you so much. That was awesome.
And there was one question in the chat, but I think it's a little bit difficult to answer, but maybe you can say something about it regarding your experience of the dogs you where you interviewed the new human companions. Is there a typical length of time for the cats or dogs that are used in research? I don't know if you had learned anything about the dogs that you learned about, how long they were in the experiment.
From my understanding, it varies based upon what they were used for. So sometimes rescues get them out of labs at 1 or 2 years old. And I think typically those dogs are more easy, they'll adapt to life outside of a lab a little bit easier. My personal dogs I adopted were in a lab for 6 and 8 years. And to go through the procedures they had to go through for such a long period of time is what made them a little bit more traumatized. But even they were able to adapt, with some patience and love. So I don't know if that answers that question.
Yeah, no, you're right. The younger, the easier it is. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Ellie. Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Marty, for your contributions. I now hand back to Mike.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think it's very clear that if Jamie were here, she would be
Absolutely.
just really proud of all this great work that everyone is doing. I've said my piece about Jamie, so I'd like to pass along the mic to Helena, who is the Deputy Director of CAAT, for some final thoughts, and then maybe some after that, so more testimonies and thoughts about Jamie, if anyone would like to round things out.
Yeah, so thank you. First of all, I want to say that this was really excellent and amazing and touching talks. All of them, I was very grateful to sit here and listen to them. And I want to thank all the speakers for making this possible. And also, of course, thank you to those from CAAT that made this possible, especially Catherine, Marty, and Mike. That was great, found great speakers once again. And when I was sitting here, I was really feeling, I am sure that Jamie was following and smiling down on this event from wherever she is. And I'm so happy that we can really continue to celebrate and honor Jamie's memory by talking about things that were so close to her heart, like animals and animal welfare. And for me, Jamie was very special, and I will never, ever forget her. She had so much energy, and she was always being fair and so straight, as Mike also said, you know, you got the truth from her. And she was also always willing to help. You know, she was this person that never, you know, you asked her for something and she was always the first one to jump in and help out wherever she was needed. So that was amazing with her. And it makes me very happy and glad to see that her family, despite their big loss, that they are able to still move on with their life, and that they, you know, are, you know, the kids, especially the kids, are, you know, getting so successful. I love to follow them on Facebook and see what's going on. And I am sure that Jamie she is still with us. She's always in our hearts. She's in your hearts, and she's for sure in my heart. And I'm very happy that I got to meet her and I got to know her. So that's all I want to say. And thank you again to all the speakers and the people at CAAT that organized it. It was very nicely done. I'm happy about it.
Thank you.